It's The Lit Show with Jeremy Fee. New episode each Tuesday. Authors welcome, comments encouraged. Hello everyone, welcome to The Lit Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Fee. As always, I've got something special for you today. It's my book battle for April 2022 reading wrap-up from Continue-A-Thon and the TBR for May, which includes Horror MAYhem and May of the Moderns as really exciting, interesting readathons. I think I want to go ahead and do the TBR first. I know that's backward from the way I normally do it, but let's do it. Let's start with the May TBR. I like Horror MAYhem. It is set up to where technically there are 4 different themes for 4 different weeks, but really the spirit is to read horror. I'm going to be able to cover all the topics for the readathon by reading the anthology The Dark Descent. The Dark Descent has several stories that were published between 1900 and 1945, so they are also perfect for May of the Moderns. So I'm going to double up in reading those, and that should cover it. Though there's more that I want to read beyond that. There's so much more that I want to read. For physical books on my TBR, I've already started The Chain by Adrian McKenty, which has been a very exciting premise. I also want to read more Dane Cobain books, formerly Meat and Scarlet Sins. That's going to have some horror stories in them. By the way, Daxter, my cat, is right here hanging out by the microphone. I'd like to read some more Agatha Christie, which would work for May of the Moderns. I've not yet read And Then There Were None. It's supposed to be even better than Death on the Nile and Murder on the Orient Express, so we'll see about that. I'd like to read my Doctor Who story collection, Tales of Terror. That would be great for Horror MAYhem as well. And the author B.K. Greenwood has been very kind, sending me autographed copies of the 3rd book of the Last Roman trilogy. It's called Absolution, and his short story collection connected to the trilogy, Bastion. Got a lot of reading ahead of me. In addition to those, I'm sure I'll listen to plenty of audiobooks, probably some Anne Rice novels and audiobooks. But let's go ahead and do our book battle. This month, the first book that I finished from John Gwynne in the exciting Bloodsworn series, it is The Hunger of the Gods. Such an amazing book. I was talking about it online, and some people started speculating perhaps nothing else would be able to top the first book I read of the month. And wouldn't that be something if the first book wins for the monthly book battle? We will have to see, because I read some really good stuff this month. In addition to that book, I'll put up on the screen 15 more books that I was able to finish this month. You know, I listened to a lot of them as audiobooks. Some of them are short as well, and that helps me. Oh, it's Jack, my other cat, has now joined us up here by the microphone. I guess they're taking turns hanging out here while I record. Alright, let's just go right into the competition. I'm not going to waste any time. In the first bracket, we've got Bloodsworn Book 2, The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne, up against the 5th book in A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. It's A Dance with Dragons. When you look at these 2 books compared against each other, they are both epic fantasy. They both have multiple point of view characters. They're both exciting. Ultimately, though, I did enjoy John Gwynne's book more. Really great characters in there, so that book's going to advance. The other set for the first bracket is some books by Bret Easton Ellis. We've got Less Than Zero and The Rules of Attraction. Both of these books were written in the 80s, 1980s, and turned into films, which is really fascinating. I actually saw The Rules of Attraction as a film before I read the book, and then I managed to watch Less Than Zero after reading the book. They're both interesting. It is Bret Easton Ellis presenting us a bunch of rich, college-age people who do a lot of drugs, have a lot of sex. Really, the plot just meanders around in both of them. If you're someone who's very plot-heavy and cares mostly about plot, these may not be the best books for you. Also, there were a lot of differences, a lot of changes when they were turned into films. If you've seen the films, you may want to still read the books, because I think the books are better than the movies. But anyway, Rules of Attraction's going to get the win here. I enjoyed the book slightly more than less than zero. They are in the same universe. There are characters that carry over in Bret Easton Ellis's 7 novels, and you will see as the month continued, I read them all. I went ahead and read all 7 of those novels. Next up are 2 of those novels. The next bracket, first set, American Psycho up against The Informers. Both of these books were turned into films as well. I saw American Psycho a long time ago. I don't think I've seen the film for The Informers. They were both good books. The Informers really changed things because it introduced vampires, so that no longer were we just dealing with American Psycho, older than college kids, maybe young business people. But in The Informers, there are actually vampires in the Los Angeles areas. So American Psycho, I'm sure you know the story. The fun of that is the ambiguity. Is the protagonist just imagining what's happening around him? Is he imagining that he's killing a bunch of people? Or is he actually killing them? And it may change from read to reread, or viewing of the movie to reviewing it. I know the first time I saw the movie, I thought, he just imagined all that stuff. It was all in his head. But when I went back and watched the movie here recently, I think that it really happened. There are clues that could go either way, and the author refuses to tell us. American Psycho's getting the win here out of the pair of them, because I think it's more interesting. I like that ambiguity. I like trying to figure it out. The next set in this bracket is The Shining by Stephen King, up against the second book in the Shining series. It's a duology, Dr. Sleep by Stephen King. And you may be wondering, why have I waited so long to read these 2 books? I don't know. I watched The Shining back to back with Dr. Sleep, which is really, really great, getting the scenes that you get back to back. There are changes made, and one of the fascinating issues with the changes made here is because they made changes back in the day to the film when they adapted it from the book, when they went to make the sequel movie, they had to deal with that because they're going to make changes adapting the book to the film anyway, but they had to be mindful of it's a sequel to the movie while being a novel adaptation sequel as well. Layers to deal with. But I thought it was great. I enjoyed the books and the films. I'm going to go ahead and give this pairing's win to The Shining, since it is the original. Stands out to be more, seems more powerful. But do not underestimate Dr. Sleep. If you've not experienced Dr. Sleep, I recommend both the book and the film, even though I was surprised by the change in the ending in the film, but I won't give you the spoiler. Coming up to the next bracket, we've got Glamorama by Bret Easton Ellis and Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis. This is where Bret Easton Ellis's books kind of fell in quality, in my opinion. Granted, they already were falling in quality, I guess, with The Informers. Glamorama is a story about one of these arrogant guys who does a lot of drugs and sleeps with people and does all this stuff, but it turns out he ends up being a male model who accidentally gets involved with basically being an international spy. And you might be thinking that this sounds like a similar premise to the movie Zoolander, and when I looked it up online, there actually was a lawsuit, some sort of probably non-disclosed payment that was made to Bret Easton Ellis when people, informed him that this movie was out there that sounded a lot like the premise of his book. And even though I haven't seen Zoolander, just the goofy comedy previews for it and such make me think it can't have that much in common with the book, because the book was a thriller and very serious in a lot of ways, with this guy's life being threatened and that sort of thing. Between these 2 books, I'm going to pick Lunar Park as the winner because I found it to be a better quality story. It's more of a horror story with a creepy little doll and what has potential to be a haunted house or possessed child situation. Again, not wanting to give you spoilers. Mindful these all technically take place in a shared universe for Bret Easton Ellis, but he gets very meta in this sense of talking about the main character acknowledging fictional occurrences acknowledging that some of the previous work is fiction because the main character is a kind of meta fourth wall fictionalized version of the author. It's weird. Anyway, it's winning this pairing. The next grouping is the 7th Bret Easton Ellis novel and the 7th one that I read this month, Imperial Bedrooms. It's up against the, let me see if I can pronounce this right, Malazan Book of the Fallen. Book 1, Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson. I finally got to it and finally got through it. What a challenging work of fantasy. So many characters, so many situations. I'm going to give the win to Gardens of the Moon. I enjoyed the challenge of the book, going back, rereading parts of it, trying to figure out what's going on with the characters. I'll have a lot to say about it in a future video, I'm sure. The last bracket, pairing number 1, The Vampire Chronicles, books 4 and 5 by Anne Rice. Book 4 is The Tale of the Body Thief, and book 5 is Memnoch the Devil. In The Tale of the Body Thief, Lestat swaps bodies with a human. So I did enjoy this fascinating concept of a guy who's been an immortal vampire and very powerful with all these supernatural gifts, suddenly being like a fish out of water, being in a human body, not being able to use his psychic powers or anything else. It had some exciting parts to it, and like I said, I liked the concept of the book, even though I did complain to some of my friends. It took like 10 to 20% of the book before it got to that concept of the body actually being swapped. But once it did, I had a lot of fun reading most of it. The 5th book in the Vampire Chronicles series is Memnoch the Devil. It is less enjoyable because it is Lestat talking with this guy who claims to be the devil. And it gets very religious, very philosophical. I mean, seriously talking about God and heaven and the angels and all the situations involved in a fictionalized sort of way that also impacts the vampire mythology and all the lore. It was basically a big book of world-building lore that involved religion. And I have no problem with that whatsoever. It was just a lot to take in, where Anne Rice was once again giving us a book without a typical plot structure. So out of the two of those, you can guess I'm going to advance The Tale of the Body Thief. It's just a more exciting, interesting, more traditional setup for a novel. Then we've got the last set in this bracket. It is the 6th book in the Vampire Chronicles, The Vampire Armand, up against Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter book number 2, The Last American Vampire by Seth Grahame-Smith. And I cannot say a lot of good things about that book. Unfortunately, it was such a letdown. You know, sometimes I am very easily entertained. I enjoyed the concept of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, but I didn't enjoy this book as much. It felt very gimmicky, where a lot of it was, oh, hey, let's talk about this famous person from history. Let's talk about this person from history. It's Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter character Henry going around interacting with a lot of famous people from history. And to me, that kind of got old very quickly. Out of the two of these, I'm going to advance The Vampire Armand, which was a really fascinating vampire story. Anne Rice giving us the tale of one of the more mysterious vampire characters, where we get to learn a lot more about his background, how he was turned into a vampire after dealing with a very difficult life, and then everything that he went through. I enjoyed learning more about Armand. That was our prelims round. Now we need to deal with our quarterfinals round of the tournament. Going back up to the top with the first bracket, it is Bloodsworn Book 2, The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne, up against The Rules of Attraction by Bret Easton Ellis. Both books are part of exciting series in a sense, even though they don't really market Bret Easton Ellis's books as being part of a series. I'm gonna give the win to John Gwynne's book. I love the characters, Brecca and the others. I found it more fun to read, so I think it deserves to advance to the semifinals. From the next bracket, it's American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis up against The Shining by Stephen King. Oh, I could say so much in comparing these two works. Both of them are horrifying in their own ways. Both of them will have you questioning the reality of what's happening at times, you know? Is a character seeing something really happening, or is a character just imagining it? Is there some sort of strange sense of the character being haunted by something? Are they social commentaries? And if so, what are they saying about society? So much is there for both of them. I'm giving the win to The Shining because it's a lot more fun. American Psycho is a lot of serial killer seeming action, insanity, or at least psychopathy, psychopath running around murdering people. He just needed to return his videotapes, but luckily in The Shining we don't have the videotapes issue. The next bracket is Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis up against Steven Erikson's Gardens of the Moon. Poor Bret Easton Ellis, I feel like I'm beating up on him here in quarterfinals. He's gonna lose once again, unfortunately. That meta stuff in Lunar Park was confusing, and I know a lot of people find the Malazan series, especially this book, at the beginning of it, confusing, trying to get into the world. So they've both got the confusing aspect to deal with. Gardens of the Moon is the more fun read out of the two of them. And that takes us to the last bracket for quarterfinals. We've got Vampire Chronicles battling it out. Book 4, The Tale of the Body Thief, against Book 6, The Vampire Armand. And as much as I enjoyed Lestat stuck in a human body and trying so hard to get his real body back, The Vampire Armand was a better story. Hate to say a more interesting character, because Lestat is interesting. But I think perhaps Armand is more sympathetic with his origins, the way he was treated growing up, and the way he was treated even after he became a vampire. I feel like Armand suffered more than Lestat did, had a lot more to overcome, and thus I'd be a lot more willing to root for him out of the vampires. Let's take a look at the final four. It's always so much fun looking at semifinals. It's John Gwynn's The Hunger of the Gods, Stephen King's The Shining, Steven Erikson's Gardens of the Moon, and Anne Rice's The Vampire Armand. For these 4 books, they're all part of a series, and that is because I was doing Continue-A-Thon this month. Well, in April, it's no longer April. Continue-A-Thon was technically just the first 2 weeks of April, but I continued Continue-A-Thon the entire month, trying to read as many series as I could and get through as much as I could. Alright, let's go to that first pairing for semifinals. The Hunger of the Gods is the second book in what I assume is a trilogy from John Gwynn for the Bloodsworn, and The Shining is book 1 out of 2 for a duology, so they've got that in common with one another. I said earlier that it was possible that The Hunger of the Gods would be unbeaten for this month, that it might have just been the best read from the very beginning of the month, and I was wrong, because The Shining was even better. Stephen King is going to get this win and advance to the finals for this month. The second pairing for semifinals, we've got Malazan, Book of the Fallen, Book 1, Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson, against The Vampire Chronicles, Book 6 by Anne Rice, with The Vampire Armand. Both of these are well-loved series. A lot of people would even say both are well-loved fantasy series. Some people call the vampire series horror because it's vampires. Some people label it as fantasy because it's, a fantasy version of reality with the vampires. Call it whatever you want. Anne Rice is advancing for The Vampire Armand because it was not as confusing as Gardens of the Moon. I did not have to go back and reread passages and try to remember the names of the characters and that sort of thing. That gives us a finals round with The Shining by Stephen King and The Vampire Armand by Anne Rice. And you may be thinking, Jeremy Fee, are you about to declare a tie? Is there going to be a tie this month? Will they both advance to the end of the year battle? And the answer is no. No tie this month, because Stephen King clearly deserves the win for The Shining. It's just one of the best horror novels ever written. I really enjoyed it. The Vampire Armand was a fun read, but ultimately the book has some issues, I believe, with the plotting. It's possible to enjoy books with flaws, even to enjoy them a whole lot, to acknowledge the flaws and say, you know what, despite the flaws, it's still a really good book. It's just this other book didn't seem to have as many flaws, and thus I enjoyed it more. Congratulations to The Shining for being my best read of the month. And it's going on to the slot for April for our end of the year book battle. I've already done the TBR for May, took care of that at the beginning of the video, so I guess we're done. Thank you very much. As always, I welcome comments down below. Which books were you rooting for? How might you have made decisions differently? What thoughts do you have about these books that I've read this month, or about the books that I put on my TBR for May? Feel free to share your thoughts for Horror Mayhem, for May of the Moderns, or even for Continue-A-Thon. I didn't count up my badges for Continue-A-Thon like I probably should have, but I cheated because I did it the whole month instead of just 2 weeks, so really wouldn't be fair to compare my results to the people who were true to the readathon and only did it for 2 weeks. Alright, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed the video and that you'll come back next week for whatever crazy video I'm gonna make, because every Tuesday is a good Tuesday for a book talk. Peace.